From Smyrna to Stepanakert, How National Defeats Reshape States. Greece after 1922 and Armenia after the loss of Artsakh. Article by Tigran Yegavian, published on February 5, 2026, on EVN Report. When defeat becomes a turning point. The loss of territory is never merely geographic. It is political, social, and deeply symbolic. Few events in the modern history of nations are as transformative as a catastrophic defeat that shatters a long-standing national promise. For Greece, the destruction of Smyrna and the loss of Asia Minor in 1922 to 1923 marked the definitive collapse of the Megali idea, the irredentist project of restoring Hellenism across Anatolia. For Armenia, the loss of Artsakh between 2020 and 2023 represents a similarly traumatic rupture, ending a central pillar of post-Soviet Armenian statehood and identity. Although separated by a century and radically different international contexts, these two experiences invite comparison. Both defeats triggered crises of political legitimacy, mass displacement, and a forced reckoning between national memory and state capacity. Greece ultimately managed, painfully and imperfectly, to reframe its national narrative and recenter the state around bounded sovereignty and internal consolidation. Armenia now stands at a similar historical crossroads, but without the benefit of a stabilizing international settlement or a consensual post-defeat narrative. This comparison is not about equivalence, it is about understanding how nations absorb defeat and whether they transform trauma into a new political horizon or remain trapped in unresolved loss. The political shock, leadership, responsibility, and legitimacy. The Asia Minor catastrophe of 1922 produced an immediate and violent political reckoning in Greece. Military collapse triggered the September 1922 revolution, forced the abdication of King Constantine I, and led to the trial of the Six, the prosecution and execution of leading political and military figures. While deeply controversial, these events reflected a widespread social demand for accountability. The monarchy emerged profoundly delegitimized, and within 2 years Greece transitioned to the Second Hellenic Republic from 1924 to 1935. This was not a clean or stable process. The interwar period saw coups, counter-coups, and institutional fragility. Yet the key point is that defeat generated a rupture in political legitimacy that the system attempted, however crudely, to address. Responsibility for failure was centralized, and the state sought to reset itself on new terms. Armenia's post-Artsakh trajectory is markedly different. Defeat produced neither regime collapse nor clear institutional reckoning. Instead, it entrenched long-term polarization. Responsibility remains endlessly contested between past and present governments, between civilian and military leadership, between external constraints and internal mismanagement. Rather than a decisive moment of accountability, Armenia entered a prolonged trial without verdict, where legitimacy is constantly questioned but never conclusively reconstituted. Unlike Greece after 1922, where defeat produced a brutal, if deeply controversial, political reckoning, Armenia's post-Artsakh experience has been marked by incomplete and contested accountability. One of the most striking episodes came in February 2021, when Chief of the General Staff and General Onik Gasparian publicly called for the resignation of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, citing the government's handling of the war and its aftermath. This unprecedented civil-military confrontation revealed the depth of institutional fracture that defeat had produced. Yet this episode did not lead to a transparent or systematic examination of responsibility. No fully independent, public, and comprehensive inquiry has clarified the strategic, operational, and political causes of the defeat. As a result, multiple blind spots persist. These include unresolved questions about intelligence failures, political decision-making during critical phases of the war, and, most sensitively, the coordination, or lack thereof, between the armed forces of the Republic of Armenia and those of Artsakh. This absence of clarity has had lasting consequences. Rather than producing a shared understanding of what went wrong, the defeat has been politicized and fragmented. Competing narratives coexist. Some emphasize diplomatic isolation, others technological asymmetry, others leadership errors, and still others structural military weaknesses. Without an authoritative assessment, public debate oscillates between accusation, denial, and fatalism. The contrast with the Greek case is instructive. In Greece, accountability was concentrated, sometimes violently, on identifiable political and military elites. This allowed the state to symbolically close the chapter of Asia Minor, even as social trauma endured. In Armenia, by contrast, the lack of a transparent reckoning has prolonged the crisis of legitimacy. The defeat of Artsakh remains both a national trauma and an unresolved political dispute, inhibiting the emergence of a shared post-defeat doctrine. More broadly, this unresolved civil-military tension raises a deeper question. Can a state reform its security architecture and strategic culture without first establishing a shared understanding of how and why it failed? Comparative history suggests not. Without such clarity, post-defeat societies struggle to move from mourning to reconstruction. They risk remaining trapped in a cycle of polarization and mistrust. The contrast is instructive. Greece's response was destabilizing but transformative. Armenia's has been stabilizing in form but corrosive in substance. Where responsibility remains diffuse and unresolved, political trust continues to erode. Refugees as a test of the state. Few experiences test state capacity more brutally than mass displacement. Following the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923, approximately 1.5 million Orthodox Christians were forcibly transferred to Greece from Asia Minor, while around 500,000 Muslims were relocated to Turkey. The influx overwhelmed housing, employment, public health, and social cohesion. Refugees arrived traumatized, impoverished, and often resented by locals. Yet over time, refugee integration became central to Greece's nation-building project. With international assistance and strong state intervention, refugees were settled, enfranchised, and gradually incorporated into political and economic life. They reshaped urban landscapes, strengthened labor movements, and profoundly influenced modern Greek culture and memory. The trauma of Smyrna did not disappear, but refugees became agents of a redefined Greek nation. Armenia now faces a similar challenge, though smaller in scale, with the displacement of Artsakh Armenians. Their integration is not merely a humanitarian issue, it is a political litmus test. Housing, employment, legal status, and social inclusion will shape how citizens perceive the Armenian state. If displaced Artsakh Armenians become fully integrated stakeholders, they may contribute to social renewal. If they remain marginalized, they risk becoming a permanent reminder of loss and state failure. History suggests a simple but unforgiving rule: nations are judged by what they do with their refugees. Integration strengthens sovereignty, neglect fractures it. The collapse of a national promise abandoning the Megali idea. The Megali idea was not just a foreign policy doctrine, it was Greece's national purpose. It provided a historical mission that linked statehood to expansion, memory to territory, and identity to restitution. Its collapse in 1922 was therefore existential. Greece did not erase the memory of Asia Minor. Smyrna remained central to Greek historical consciousness, literature, and collective mourning. What changed was the relationship between memory and state doctrine. The state stopped organizing itself around irredentist redemption and instead reframed Smyrna as a tragic lesson in overreach. National identity was re-anchored in survival, consolidation, and modernization within recognized borders. This separation between memory and strategy was decisive. Greece mourned without governing through mourning. Armenia faces a parallel dilemma. For 3 decades, Artsakh was not only a territorial issue, but a foundational element of Armenian post-Soviet identity, security thinking, and diaspora mobilization. Its loss has created a vacuum. The unresolved question is whether Artsakh becomes a memory structured around rights, justice, and dignity, or whether it remains an implicit strategic objective that the state lacks the capacity to pursue. The Greek experience suggests that abandoning an expansionist doctrine does not require abandoning historical consciousness. It requires redefining the role of memory in statecraft. International settlement, Lausanne and the Armenian void. One decisive difference between the two cases lies in the international context. Greece's defeat culminated in the Treaty of Lausanne, which, despite its brutality, produced a clear, if painful, settlement, recognized borders, population exchanges, and a new regional order. Lausanne ended ambiguity. It forced Greece to confront a definitive geopolitical reality and reorganize accordingly. Armenia has no equivalent. There is no comprehensive peace settlement, no robust security guarantees, no clear regional architecture. Borders remain contested, deterrence uncertain, and alliances fluid. This absence of closure prolongs strategic anxiety and fuels domestic polarization. Without a stabilizing framework, post-defeat societies struggle to move from mourning to planning. The Armenian case illustrates the dangers of living in an unresolved after, where neither war nor peace provide structure. Long-term implications, 3 paths after defeat. Greece's trajectory after 1922 was neither linear nor serene, but abandoning the Megali idea eventually allowed for a redefinition of patriotism around state capacity, citizenship, and institutional development. Armenia today faces 3 broad scenarios. First, there is a realist refoundation, a sober reassessment of security doctrine, integration of displaced populations, institutional reform, and diversified external partnerships. Second, traumatic stasis, politics dominated by grievance, blame, and symbolic maximalism, with limited strategic recalibration. Third, radicalization or exhaustion, either through ideological overreach or widespread civic disengagement. Which path prevails will depend less on memory itself than on how memory is politically instrumentalized. Greece did not overcome Smyrna by forgetting it. It overcame Smyrna by ceasing to govern in its name. The catastrophe became a foundational memory rather than a strategic horizon. Armenia now faces a comparable historical moment. The loss of Artsakh can either paralyze the state or compel its reinvention. The lesson is stark. After defeat, the central question is not what the nation remembers, but what the state can credibly guarantee. Security, dignity, and integration, not nostalgia, determine whether loss becomes an endpoint or a turning point.